I'm Dane Rose. Every sustained pattern of behavior, which is on a continuum between abusive and loving, incompetent and excellent, has a number of parts. So first, there's the masculine role of the initiator, of the actor, of the abuser. And then there's the feminine role of the recipient, of the participator, of the one that is acted upon. And in any human interaction, in any given moment, one person is in the masculine role of speaking and another is listening, giving and another is receiving, acting and another person is reacting or responding, doing and another one is witnessing. So every human dynamic, every human interaction breaks down into these two poles of masculine and feminine position because they are necessary for flow. You don't get exchange without a giver and a receiver. And they cannot exist without one another. They are equal on a scientific level. But on a cult level, in a chauvinistic cult, masculine positions, masculine behaviors, masculine values are elevated in both men and women, and feminine positions, feminine behaviors, feminine actions, and females themselves are undervalued. That's the essence of chauvinism. It was a term formed by a Frenchman, Mr. Chauvin, who was a pig-headed moron. And so we have these parts in any interaction. But we also have the witness. The witness is everyone who understands what's going on. The witness is everyone who watches what's happening and chooses one of two positions, either to allow it, which is the feminine position, or to intercede, which is the masculine position. So you have the masculine and feminine dialectic in any interaction, and then you have the masculine and feminine position in the witness. Now, the chauvinism of our cult places all of the emphasis on the masculine pole that is the initiatory role. So, for example, when we look at who commits a crime, we don't share the responsibility equally between these dynamics, because there's also an invisible dynamic behind the initiator and the recipient, behind the witness in both their dynamic and passive role, and it's called the cult or the culture. And the culture is a template of value hierarchies and of interactive memes, of value hierarchies and interactive memes. So value hierarchies in a cult shift from cult to cult. There have been 10,000 cults in human history, according to anthropologists, and there's two parts of a culture. You have the cult part, which is the dogmatic, self-perpetuating, self-referential pattern of just maintaining a status quo, however absurd. And then you have the culture, the chur part, which is the part that actually makes some degree of sense. You have uniqueness in different cultures, some that emphasize the individual more, some that emphasize the circle more, some that emphasize men more, some that emphasize women more, some that emphasize spirituality, some that emphasize materialism. Every single human being in the history of humanity places some value, positive or negative, In a highly chauvinistic system, you can actually have a negative value on something where, for a boy to be called like a girl, for example, in a chauvinistic culture is worse than neutral. It's actually net negative. And so you have a hierarchy of values, and values are in tension with one another. If you look at the most cults in human history, of the 10,000 cults that anthropologists are familiar with or estimate, we see all kinds of polarities. You can look at the tarot archetypal arcanas. So you have the lover and the warrior in polar opposites. You have the wise one and the fool. And in a sophisticated hierarchy, one is not elevated above the other. But within a cult, there is always hierarchy. So, America likes to tout itself as the land of the free and the land of the brave, for example. And so, as part of that, the focus, in many ways, the Marlboro man, the rugged individual, whether it's male or female, now that feminism has caught on, women are now the rugged, independent females who don't need anyone, but it's that same archetype: independence, freedom. No one's going to stop me. It's all up to me. So the emphasis on the individual. But if you take a circle, for example, if you take a color wheel or a bicycle tire, and you try and justify scientifically why one part is more important than the other, you can't do it. This is a romance of cults. Cults like to elevate one part of the psyche, one aspect of femininity or masculinity, one type of activity above all others. And so this is the cult nature of cults. It makes no sense, but everyone does it. It's the madness of crowds. And so the cult is really the invisible hand behind the individuals that are playing the role, because the cult has masculine faces and feminine faces that have different levels of ranking within the cult. For example, in America, you will find Toastmasters. And a scientist will point out something interesting, which is that the goal is not speaking. The goal is not listening. The goal is communication. But when that's filtered through chauvinism, the emphasis on communication is on better speaking, not better listening. Because listening is a feminine position. And any chauvinist will tell you that the masculine position is much more important. And so you don't want to learn effective public listening, because that's weak, that's feminine, that's nothing. You want to learn effective public speaking. That's important. The rugged individual who spoke his mind against the crowd, who prevailed against the circle, right? I want to be that one. I want to be the one who stood up and heroically ranted against the crowd and da-da-da-da-da. I want to be the archetype of the chauvinistic masculine, whether it's a female or male. The rugged individual that spoke their mind and wouldn't listen to anyone, right? So this is the madness, the insanity of the American cult. It's not communication. It's not sanity. It's not science. It's the cult of America. The rugged individual against the feminine circle, against the community, in opposition, in defiance, who spoke rather than listened, who acted rather than reacted, who led rather than followed, who went forward and did whatever the fuck they wanted to do independent of the environment, right? Because the environment is feminine. And so we have a highly chauvinistic cult, and the individual is a fractal representation. The individual ego is a fractal representation, a microcosm of the cult in which they were born. And so we have, again, the initiator, the responder, and we have the audience, we have the witness. Now, chauvinism wants to tell us that the only person who's responsible is the one who acts. Has nothing to do with the cult, has nothing to do with the environment, and that the witness that is a passive bystander. Physicists will say there are no witnesses, there are only participants, because the act of witnessing actually changes the impact of the experiment. At high level physics, you cannot witness an event without in some way affecting it. And the same is true in social circles. In many ways, the abuse literature tells us that what the victim of abuse experiences most poignantly is the passivity of those who witness the event and do nothing. And there's scientific reason for this, because the witnesses, if you think of an event going on, be it a sport event, be it a family event, be it a school event, there's usually two or a few people participating in an interaction at any given moment. And to the degree that that interaction is asymmetrical, someone's taking a lot more than they're giving, someone is shunting all of the pain in the group onto one person, scapegoating. To the degree that there's an asymmetry in that interaction, pain is a byproduct. Pain and unsustainability. And so you can think of the concentration of focus as the thing that makes something unsustainable. For example, if one person had to pay all the taxes for the whole country, they'd be bankrupt and then some. And then the country would collapse because there wouldn't be enough revenue. But if everyone has to pay a certain amount, no one collapses and the country thrives. It's the same with scapegoating psychological dynamics. If one person has to pay the tax for either the failure or the growth of the entire group, that person falls by the wayside, goes under, and the group suffers, either by losing individuals and fracturing, or simply by not learning enough, because the paradigm is faulty. The paradigm is it's all this person's fault, or it's all this person's fault, so I don't have to do anything. But the power always lies in the witness, because there are always 100 times more witnesses than there are perpetrators and victims, speakers and listeners, students and teachers, therapists and patients. Whatever this polarity is in a dynamic of exchange, the majority is always held by the witness. There's billions of people, and then there's a given event at any given moment. And so the power to allow something or to intercede lies primarily with the witness, because the witness is the majority. The witness has the largest mass. And when you can think of the experience of, let's take a classic abuse dynamic. So an arsonist comes over, an ex-boyfriend, whatever, and sets fire to your house. You cry for help. And the fire truck is there, and a crowd is there, and buckets are there. But no one puts out the fire, claiming that it's not my problem. It's not my responsibility. I didn't start the fire. Well, the fire, of course, grows in this environment and catches to the next building and catches to the next building. And at some point, even the stupidity of the American cult catches on that maybe we have to do something about this. Now, of course, if this was a literal outer fire, we would be on it because we're good materialists. That's part of the cult of America. But if shame collapse is the fire, the virus that's spreading, or if sexual abuse and trauma is going from house to house, we're too dumb to grasp that our daughter might be next, that our brother might be next, that we might be next, or that we might find ourselves in this mysterious unconscious pattern of being the next one that sets fire to the next person's house and not quite understanding how we came to be playing that role. But again, the power lies in the circle. For any behavior dynamic to persist, you have to have an initiator who is willing to get the energy in motion. You have to have a recipient willing to receive or unable to stop receiving that energy. So there you get into, in physics, laws of mass. And you have to have a witness. And the witnesses can be doing a variety of things. They can be turning with their back to the event. I don't want to know, don't tell me. They can be watching and just saying, wow, that's terrible, but it's not my problem. Or they can be interacting to put out the flame and to understand and own the issue. How did this get started? What needs to be done here? In Toyota, they have a fabulous system that goes back 5 levels. So when a major mistake happens at Toyota, they stop the assembly plant and they go back 5 levels. Why did this happen? Well, the reason was because, so-and-so just had a baby and, and so they were tired. It's like, well, why did that happen? Well, we don't have adequate sick leave for people with this and this and this, and our bonus structure is such that they really needed that bonus and and they couldn't do that and take time off work and And why did that happen? Well, we really don't consider families in Toyota as part of this and this. And why did that happen? Well, the leader of the company doesn't have kids. He works 80, 90-hour a week, and it's not his priority. And why did that happen? Because the shareholders wanted a driven leader with this and this and have no interest in families. Okay, so we've gotten to a sense that the shareholders are actually being hurt by vital mistakes that are being that are occurring because only the shareholders are being taken into account in the choice of leadership. So our next leader needs to be someone who cares about the families of our people and the shareholders, or the shareholders and everyone else will be hurt. That's the Toyota analysis. And everyone takes responsibility for going into those levels of depths, and you see transformation. And that's the goal of the process. The goal of the process is to evolve the cult, to turn a little bit of the dogma into culture, into something that is actually an intelligent response to the needs of the group, to the equation that is the ultimate equation of intelligence. How efficient is the formula of the cult at transforming energy, time, money, and natural resources, attention, feelings, into human well-being? That equation is the measure of the intelligence of every cult, of every individual, of every community. How efficient is energy being transformed into sustainable human well-being, and how efficiently is that well-being being circulated and shared around the circle? Because in an egotistical framework, the concentrations of wealth and energy are part of climbing the capitalist pyramid, for example. But as an engineer, if you put all of the weight or all of the spokes on one part of the bicycle wheel and then try and drive that bicycle, the more asymmetrically the weight is distributed, whether it's the weight of blame, the weight of shame, the weight of abuse, all scapegoating, or the weight of money, or the weight of rank and value, the more asymmetrically the weight is distributed, the bumpier the ride. And so all cults at their core are deviations from science, are deviations from the mathematics of effective geometry. And to a certain extent, a little bit of unbalance that is consciously regulated and understood can lead to diversity in value hierarchy, etc. But anytime a cult becomes too self-referential, it's good because it's good, and it's good, and that's why I said it's good, and I said it's good because it's good, and it's good because it's good. Where's the equation? Where's the science? Show me how that way of doing things creates more well-being over time than all the other options available. Well, what does that have to do with it? This is who we are. We're America and apple pie. We're this. Who cares about apples and pies? We are an obese nation. We've got that covered. Starch and sugar, obesity, yes. America and apple pie, but what does that have to do with well-being? What does that have to do with intelligence? What does it have to do with mathematics? What does it have to do with science? Who gives a shit that this is who you are because this is who you are, because that's who you were, because that's who you were before, and if it was good enough for them, it's good enough for me. Who gives a shit? And this is the fulcrum point. This is the fulcrum point. Does a cult evolve based on data? Or does it deteriorate into unconscious dogma, where the perpetrator does what the perpetrator did before, where the victim receives the wound the past victim received, because every perpetrator was once a victim, and the audience, the bystanders, the witnesses stand by and say it's not my problem because it's not happening to me right this moment. It's not my problem. My house isn't burning right this minute. So I'm not going to put out your house. And because I'm not going to put out your house, it's going to spread to this house and this house and this house and this house. And then, oh my goodness, my house might get burned down as well. And then it's not anyone else's problem, right? So your house gets burned down, as well. So these equations speak to a level of intelligence. And we're here today because of a faulty equation. Every single member of the circle, we have the perpetrator, Peter Sandhill. We have the first rounds of enablers and perpetrators, the other high facilitator bodies. We have the witnesses, the high board of directors. And then we have the team and we have the community. And every one of them is saying it's okay for a high facilitator to sexually abuse a therapeutic client under the influence of psychedelics. And the way that you say something is okay is by doing nothing to stop it, by burying it, by refusing to give a refund, by refusing to apologize, by saying it's not a high issue, it's not our issue, it's nothing to do with the Human Awareness Institute, that its core team is doing the exact opposite of its mission. Why would that have anything to do with us? And of course, it's nothing to do with the public at large. So we can see our cult in action. we can see our cult in action. An education system that will take you cradle to grave without any trauma literacy, without any sexual abuse literacy, with teaching shame and scapegoating rather than ownership and scientific reform, with silencing the truth anytime anyone has any power in this cult and something comes out that reveals the stupidity of the cult as born or expressed through that individual. Information is suppressed. Information is spun. Lies are told. Our president reveals this in beautiful, beautiful technicolor every day. This is our cult in action, with more data points than we usually see, because our president is proud to embody the stupidity, the cruelty, the chauvinism of our cult. Proud to attack anyone that can be attacked in silence. And so we see it here in action. And what I'm saying is that chauvinism doesn't work. It is not just the fault of the perpetrator. And it is not okay for the victim to be scapegoated and carry the weight for the entire circle. And it doesn't work for those who hold the majority of the power, the silent witnesses. It doesn't work for them to pretend it's not my problem and to stay silent and refuse to exercise their power, to vote, to speak, to advocate, and to respond to the many dysfunctional patterns of abuse in our cult. That this doesn't work. And in an effort to respond to that, I'm distributing the energy and the awareness of this abuse dynamic between all of the parts equally. I'm here. I'm a member of the abuse cult because I managed to get to age 40. I managed to do $140,000 of therapy and have no idea what trauma was or how it applied to me. I didn't know what abuse of power was in a therapeutic setting. I didn't know what sexual abuse was in a therapeutic setting. In other words, I'm a great representation of the emotionally illiterate, traumatically illiterate, sociopathic, chauvinistic idiot that is the American individual, raised by a chauvinistic, trauma-illiterate, highly abusive and traumatizing, relationally incompetent, mythologically illiterate. You know, we are psychically, we do not understand the human psyche. And we are operating from a place of willful ignorance and profound arrogance. This is the American cult, which produces fractal representations of that in the American ego, the American individual ego. And the saddest thing, of course, is this interesting dichotomy with cults. If you travel around the world a lot, as I have, you can spot an American just about anywhere. They're the person in Pakistan who is saying to the Pakistani, I want peanuts, peanuts, who imagines that if they just say English loud enough, that every country around the world will somehow pick it up because it's every country's job to learn their way of doing things. So the interesting dichotomy in this joke, which is kind of, I would call it the American archetype of the joke. You know, obviously there's very positive and beautiful things about America and Americans as well. But this joke archetype, is narcissistically self-centered, profoundly arrogant, has no idea what it has no idea about, ignorant of its own ignorance, but wants the rest of the world to speak English. And then when the Pakistani or whatever comes to America, they're just as upset. There's no symmetry. Because, of course, if we expected everyone from around the world to come into American convenience stores and start shouting Pakistani or Israeli or Thai or whatever, and we would just magically learn to speak Thai because they started shouting it loud enough, this would make sense. But the other joke is, of course, that every American is convinced that they're an individual and that no one's going to tell them what to do. Except, who was the one who told every American that they had to be worried about being told what to do and that they had to be an individual? You come back to the life of Brian. You are all individuals. We are all individuals. There's the American cult right there. You can spot an American anywhere around the world, but we're all individuals and totally unique, and no one's going to tell us what to do. And you can't begin to break that programming until you, traveling helps, of course, because then you can see through a few of the blind spots. But we are maintaining a myth that has nothing to do with science, that says that you have the right to observe a crime, to observe massive injustices and social cruelty, financial cruelty, and do nothing and share none of the responsibility. Meaning the paradigm is, it's not my problem. Another good American meme if you want to participate in a tail-spinning culture. It's not my problem. This is a lie. Meaning a scientist will say that tremendous amount of harm that will touch you and everyone you care about comes from that attitude. So it is a lie relative to intelligence. Intelligence is the efficiency with which energy becomes human well-being. And so this is a place to challenge that lie. Whether you're an abuser, whether you're a victim, whether you're a witness, whether you're a teacher of the cult. The cult is the invisible hand behind the whole matrix. But even though the cult creates all of the fractal patterns of the individuals are responsible to either accept the cult passively or to dynamically interact with the cult and challenge it to be a little bit more scientific. Challenge it to gather data and respond to the data. Or to just repeat the cycle. Because just like a bicycle wheel, if it's warped in 20% of the area and it hits the brake and it creates a screech, well, believe me, if you do nothing and carry riding, every time the bicycle wheel passes through that area, it's going to screech. That's cause and effect. But if you get off the bicycle and bend that little bit back into shape, because you actually own that it's your problem as opposed to it's everyone but my problem, if you participate in forming a team, if you need 5 or 6 people to help, and you volunteer to be one of them and start finding help, the problem can shift. And then every revolution of the bicycle wheel happens a little bit smoother because of your participation, because you owned it. You owned the power and the freedom to respond to something that was off, to something that was imbalanced. And in doing so, you put out the fire. And that's when you start to have a sustainable community. That's when the culture starts to ascend the thermals rather than tailspin into the ground. And that's my invitation to you today.